Alrighty. Okay, I think enough people have trickled in for now. Hi everyone. My name is Elisha Sajus. Good afternoon. I'm the Senior Programs Officer of NIFA's Grants Department, and thank you for attending today's info session for the 2025 NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship in Playwriting Screenwriting. And before I get started on the actual presentation, do just want to bring up we have some upcoming information sessions for the other disciplines that we're offering this year. We already held the info session for architecture, environmental structures, and design. And today you're attending the info session for playwriting, screenwriting. But if there is a different discipline that you're interested in learning more about and attending, the upcoming dates are up on the screen. And if you'd like to RSVP, you're welcome to do that on the fellowship's homepage. All of our info sessions are being recorded, including this one, and will be viewable on the NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship homepage about 1 week after this live session. I also do want to note that this is the first year that we are sharing a panel nomination form for the 2025 fellowship cycle. So applicants are not eligible to be panelists for the same year that they're applying for the NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship. However, if you'd like to nominate someone to be a panelist, or someone who may be interested in filling out the forms themselves, they're welcome to do so. And that form also lives on the NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship homepage. And now that I've shared this, I want to jump into the agenda for today's um, info session. I'll be giving an overview of the NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship for anyone who may be learning about it for the first time. I'll also go over applicant eligibility, the evaluation process for this award, as well as how to apply, the application questions that will be available to you once you start completing your application, as well as some tips, and then followed by a Q&A. So after I go through this presentation, there will be a Q&A portion. So if anyone happens to have any questions, you're welcome to use the Q&A box, which you should be able to find either in the top or bottom of your screen. It's two quote bubbles that says Q&A. And you're welcome to leave questions throughout the presentation or wait until I go through a section that you're interested in learning more about. And if I still haven't answered your questions, you're welcome to drop them in the Q&A box then. And the deadline for this year's for the 2025 NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship is Tuesday, December 17, 2024 at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And I do want to note that this is 5 p.m. December 17th. This is the time that the application form on Submittable will automatically close and stop accepting applications. So definitely make sure that you submit before that hard deadline. And all applicants will be notified of their outcome by summer of 2025. Um, just want to give a brief overview for anyone who is learning about the NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship for the first time. This is an $8,000 unrestricted cash grant available to artists living in New York State and or one of the tribal nations located therein. It is awarded in a total of 15 different disciplines over a 3-year period. So 5 categories are offered each year. 5 different categories are offered each year, and the application is free to complete. The NISCA NIFA Artist Fellowship is not a project grant, but is instead intended to fund an artist's vision and voice at all different levels of their artistic development. There is an eligibility criteria that I'll go through right now. For those who can apply, you must be 25 years or older by the application deadline date. You must also be a current resident of New York State and or one of the tribal nations located in New York State. In addition to that, you must have maintained residency in New York State for at least the last 2 consecutive years. So for this year cycle, that would be for the entirety of 2023 and 2024. Additionally, you cannot be enrolled in a degree-seeking program of any kind. And you must be the originator of the work that you are submitting, as in choreographers or playwrights can submit their work versus um, interpretive artists such as dancers or actors. In addition to that, you must not have received a Niska NIFA Artist Fellowship in any discipline within the last 5 consecutive years. So for this year cycle, that would be anyone who may have been awarded a Niska NIFA Artist Fellowship between 2020 and 2024. And I do want to note that this is specific to the Niska NIFA Artist Fellowship for this award. This is not related to Niska grants. So anyone who's applied for a Niska grant, that is a totally separate grant from the Niska NIFA Artist Fellowship. Similarly, if anyone has been awarded for a different NIFA award that we administered, that is also separate from this restriction. I just want to make that clear. Um, oh, sorry, jumped ahead. Additionally, you cannot submit any work samples that have previously been awarded in this NIFA Artist Fellowship. So if anyone attending is a past fellow for this award, you would have to submit new work samples. While collaborating artists are eligible to apply, the total number of artists cannot exceed 3 individuals, and that includes the submitter. The submitter in this case will be the lead applicant submitting the form. Uh, each artist applying must meet all of the eligibility criteria for this award. And if you're applying as a collaboration, you cannot apply separately as an individual. Artists can apply in a maximum of 2 categories each cycle. So for this year's cycle, if there are 2 categories that you're interested in applying for, you can. So if you're applying as an individual, you can apply in 2 different categories. And if you're applying as a collaboration, you can apply as a collaboration in 2 different categories for this year's cycle. You cannot be a recent NIFA employee, a member of the NIFA board or committee, part of this year's panel committee, or an immediate family member of any of the above. And anyone who has been awarded a Niska NIFA Artist Fellowship receives emeritus status and is no longer eligible for the award. That is a very small number of people, and I imagine it is not anyone who is on this call, but we do want to mention that if anyone has been awarded for this award 5 times, you would no longer be eligible to apply. Now, I just want to give some background over the evaluation process. Applications are reviewed over the course of 3 elimination rounds, and all applications are reviewed anonymously in round 1, which means your name will not be visible in that round. In rounds 1 and 2, the panel will carefully review and score their assigned applications independently. And as I mentioned, all of them are being reviewed anonymously in that first round. So every application is assigned a number and will be going through an elimination process. Following that, the panel will meet as a group to collectively discuss the applications that have made it into that after those 2 rounds, and it will conclude with selecting the fellowship recipients. Now, in addition to that evaluation process, as some people may want to know, there is an evaluation criteria, and this is the criteria that the panel will be referring to throughout the review process. And the first piece is artistic merit. A competitive application demonstrates excellence in their discipline through strong work samples that highlight the applicant's creativity, technical proficiency, and cohesive artistic vision. Followed by clarity and cohesiveness. A competitive application presents clear, concise, and compelling support statements that provide valuable insights into their practice and motivations. The support statements should also work together with the submitted work samples to provide a comprehensive understanding of the applicant's vision and goals. And followed by originality and innovation. A competitive application showcases innovative methods, ideas, and/or concepts that makes their work stand out within the discipline. Panelists will assess the uniqueness and originality of the applicant's approach, including the quality of execution, innovation in materials or techniques, or overall impact of your work. And keep in mind, this is an evaluation criteria that's being used for all of our disciplines, but is tailored to align with the discipline that you're applying for. So in this case, if there are certain pieces here that would not be relevant to the playwriting, screenwriting category, they won't be considered during that panel review process. All right. As for how to apply for the Niska Knight for Artist Fellowship, not only in playwriting, screenwriting, but for any of the available categories, you must create a Submittable account. Submittable is the platform that we use for our application forms. It is free to create an account. If you have an existing Submittable account, either you've applied in the past for this award or a different award uh, that uses uh, Submittable, you're welcome to use that account and apply. Once you've created your Submittable account or you already have one and you can sign into it, you can choose an application which will be available on the NYFA Grant Submittable portal. So in this case, for anyone who's here, I imagine you'll be choosing the playwriting, screenwriting application, and you'll click on that. When you do click on that application, before you have access to the entire application form, there is an eligibility form that you will need to complete. So carefully review that application form and answer it correctly so that you will have access to the rest of the application form. And once you're in and you have access to the entire form, you fill it out. You can save it as a draft and return to it at a later date. So you're not held to your screens as soon as you start it. You're welcome to start it at any point and return to it and complete it online. We don't accept any hard copies. And once you're all done, you want to make sure you hit the submit button at the end of your application form. And you should expect to receive an email confirmation from Submittable shortly after submitting your application. And if you don't see that email, definitely check your spam folder first. And if you really don't see it, you're welcome to shoot us an email to double check to ensure that you actually submit it. Now, for playwriting and screenwriting, this is the discipline description that we use for this category and also the discipline description that the panel will be using for this discipline. This category accepts work in the writing of stage plays, screenplays, teleplays, libretti, radio plays, and audio dramas. While librettists may apply in this category, no audio tapes are accepted in this category. Now, for the application form, I've already touched on a few things, but I will be diving a little deeper into some of them in a bit. But the first section of the application form does include the eligibility form that you will need to complete. This will be followed by the lead applicant information and or collaboration info if that's applicable to you or your group that's applying. And this is just a section to add your contact details, as well as the names of the one or two collaborating artists that are applying with you if you're applying as a collaboration, followed by some additional questions that are relevant to the award that you're applying for in this category. Followed by that, there's a section for your work samples, which I'll be going more into, as well as a section for your support statements and your demographic information. And I do want to note the demographic information section is not going to be reviewed by the panel. This is information that will only be used internally for reporting purposes, but will not be shared with the panel. But is a section that you will have to complete before hitting submit. As for your work samples, this is one of the most important parts of your application. It is one of the primary things that the panel will be reviewing. And I mentioned earlier that this is not a project grant. So in this case, you should be submitting work that is either completed or a completed piece of an ongoing or continuing body of work. So in this case, if the work has already been fully completed, you can submit that, or a work that is not a rough draft. Applicants can submit one manuscript up to 20 pages in maximum length, plus an additional title page. So that would be a total of 21 pages within your manuscript. The format accepted is PDF, so you can submit one PDF file. It must be in English, and the format is 12-point font double spaced or in script format. The title page should include the title of the piece and the date of completion of that piece, but do not label your work sample with your name. As I mentioned earlier, the first round is anonymous. Your name will be available in future rounds from the section where we ask for you to include your name. Your manuscript can't consist of a singular body of work or multiple bodies of work. Just keep in mind if you decide to submit a manuscript that comprises of more than one body of work, it still has to be one PDF. So you would have to combine that, and you want to clearly indicate which works are labeled in there so that the panel can easily navigate through your manuscript. If your work sample includes a combination of excerpts from larger works, you are strongly advised to include substantial portions from each large work rather than small fragments. So one thing to keep in mind when considering what pieces you want to submit in your application. We ask that you do not include any publication or production information anywhere on your manuscript, as well as to not include your resume in your PDF. But I do want to note that your materials can be previously published or not. So if your work has already been published, you're welcome to submit that. And you're welcome to submit work that hasn't been published. If your work has been published, though, scanned excerpts from books or periodicals in public unpublished form will not be eligible. So definitely ensure that you're submitting a file that isn't just a photocopy scan of that published piece. I already mentioned this previously, but your manuscript must be in English. However, they can also be translated into English by someone other than you as the writer. So if you need your work to be translated into English, that is fine as well. Panelists are instructed to not to review beyond the number of pages. So I do just want to emphasize that the work that you should be submitting is 20 pages plus that additional title page, which will make it a total of 21. All right. In addition to this, we do ask artists to submit a synopsis. It is required and up to 250 words max. This is a supplemental statement that should explain the context, concept, and execution of your work sample or work samples. The statement can also explain how the excerpted work samples relate to the entire original piece. So if your work that you're submitting is coming from a much larger piece, this is your opportunity to provide that explanation for the panel. And within the synopsis, you can itemize each work sample and talk about them individually if you would like. There's also the option to provide a character sheet. And one thing I forgot to mention for the synopsis and similar for the character sheet, both of these are in within the application form are text boxes that live within the form. So you would not be uploading a PDF for these sections. So to keep in mind that this word count is a hard word count and does live within their corresponding text boxes. But you do have the option to submit a character sheet, and it is a supplemental description of any relevant character personalities as they relate to the work sample. So you can include the role, appearance, motivations, conflicts, relationships, etc. That shows this any significance related to the story that you're sharing. This is also an opportunity to capture the essence of each character in a few lines. And this is something that the panel will also have access to while looking at your work sample or work samples. Now we've gone through all those portions that you could submit your work samples and the items that could supplement it. There are your support statements. Um, your support statements, similar to the synopsis and character sheet, must be submitted directly into the application form in their corresponding text boxes. And one recommendation that we do have is before you put your statements in there, you can work on them on Microsoft Word or Google Docs before pasting them into the text box. Just gives you an opportunity to have it saved somewhere else, just in case if you forget to save your application as a draft and lose that information, you have a backup as well as sometimes you may be able to catch things on Microsoft Word or Google Docs in a way that you probably wouldn't have within your application form. But for your required support statement, there is the artist statement, and it is a concise statement giving an overview of your artistic practice. You can submit up to 250 words maximum. And the statement should give a brief introduction to the ideas, themes, and methods in your practice. So in this case, how you make what you make, or how why you write what you write. The statement should also specifically reflect the ideas and inspiration relevant to your submitted work samples. And you can use the statement to highlight your role in creating or executing your work, as well as describing any key technical aspects for your work. You can also use the statement to describe the circumstances in which the viewer audience should experience your work, especially for anyone who's submitting work that would potentially involve an audience of some form. This is your opportunity to share that in your statement. And your artist statement is not your bio. So that's also another thing we want to emphasize. The other support statement that is available to you is an optional cultural statement. You can submit up to 250 words max. This statement, it's a supplemental statement that describes how your work is related and or rooted in a specific cultural practice, tradition, or community. The statement can also offer an opportunity to describe how your work relates to or stems from your culturally specific lived experiences. So if you're submitting work that you feel uh, this statement would supplement some explanation related to your practice and work, you're welcome to submit it. But if you feel like it's not relevant, there's no obligation to, since it is optional. Now I've gone through all of the contents that are on the application form that you will need to submit. And before we get into Q&A, I just want to share some additional tips. And one is to review the application guidelines closely. Definitely take the time to go through that before you start your application, or at least before you submit your application, to ensure that you have reviewed everything and you have everything that you need, so you can feel confident about your submission. You also want to carefully review and answer the eligibility questions on the application. So if you are deemed ineligible while completing the eligibility form, you just want to double check and see what you may be answering. You may also realize that you may ultimately be ineligible, but definitely take the time to do that review to ensure that you're able to get through that, to see that rest of the application form. You also want to ensure that your contact information is correct. In summer of 2025, we will be notifying all artists of their application results. So you definitely want to use an email address that is frequently checked and is active, so that it doesn't get lost in the ether and we're able to reach out to you. You also want to allow enough time to upload your work samples. You only have to submit one PDF, but technology is not always our friend. Sometimes it really betrays us. So you definitely want to make sure that, which leads into my next point, that you're not waiting for the final hours ahead of the deadline to complete and submit your applications. You want to make sure, if there are any technical issues, you have time to prepare your work samples to be uploaded successfully so that you can successfully submit your application. Sometimes the bandwidth slows down when we get really close to a deadline. A lot of people do like to submit in those final hours, and that can affect the platform. So since you're all on here today, it's pretty early. You have a lot of time to start your application. You can start your application today and save it as a draft and complete it at a later date. You don't have to complete it early. We don't review applications on a rolling basis, but you don't also want to wait until that very last day. And that last day, I do want to remind everyone, is Tuesday, December 17th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And that is a hard deadline. All right. Well, that's everything for this presentation. Thank you. If you have any further questions, I'm going to be jumping into a Q&A, but of course, you may have questions throughout the open cycle. So you're welcome to visit the Niskanen for Artists Fellowship homepage for all of the information that I've shared today. You're also welcome to check the frequently asked questions page for any questions that if I didn't answer them today, they may live on that FAQ page. So you can check that as well. But and if you have any questions after this that you want to direct to us, please feel free to contact us at fellowships@NYFA.org. But for at least for the duration of this info session, I'll be doing a Q&A for anyone who's come in a bit later. Um, there is a Q&A box either at the top or the bottom of your screen, so please feel free to leave your questions in that Q&A box, and I'll go through them. All right, let's see what questions we have. I am both a playwright and choreographer. Should I go to the choreography webinar as well? Um, you're welcome to if you would like more information about the choreography category, you can. Of course, if for some reason you can't attend, and for anyone who's coming later, this information may be important to you as well. All info sessions are being recorded and will be posted on the fellowship's homepage about 1 week after the live session. So if you want to attend the live session, you can. You're also welcome to attend later. You're not required to attend any of our information sessions, but you do have that option. So you're welcome to if you would like. Can you submit two applications for this category if you have a teleplay and a play to submit as separate work samples? Unfortunately, no, you can't submit two different applications in the same category. You can apply in up to two different categories. You can submit multiple bodies of work in your singular playwriting screenwriting application if you would like, but if you want to submit two separate applications, you cannot do that. So you do want to take the time and consider whether or not you want to submit both that teleplay and play in your singular work sample, or if you want to decide on choosing one or the other for your application. So I hope that clarifies things for you. All right. Just to confirm, I received a NYC Women's Fund grant about a year and a half ago. Am I still eligible to apply for this NYFA fellowship? Yes. You're welcome to apply. The only restriction we have is related to anyone who has been a recipient within the last 5 years for the Niska NYFA Artist Fellowship. So just for this award specifically, if anyone was awarded between 2020 and 2024, they would not be eligible to apply for the next 5 years until that window opens up again. But anyone who's applied for, say, for example, a Niska grant, um, that's a separate award, so you're still eligible. Similarly, the NYC Women's Fund was administered by us at NYFA and is a different grant, so it does not restrict you from applying for this award so long as you're not a recent fellowships recipient. So in short, yes. Can the sample for playwriting be a bilingual play? While you can submit a play that I guess one thing I will suggest, it does have to be in English. However, if there are certain sections within your play where leaving certain language is very important to the significance of that manuscript, you can create a little glossary or something that can navigate the panel so that they have an understanding while keeping in mind that it does primarily need to be in English. This is one suggestion I would have. Um, and I hope that that is answering your question in submitting a bilingual play. Does the sample have to be 20 pages long or could it be shorter? For example, 16 pages? Yes, you don't have to submit 20 pages. You can submit fewer than 20 pages. We just ask that you don't exceed the 20 pages because the panel will only be reviewing 20 pages of work. So you're welcome to submit work that is less than that. Um, just getting into the questions. Do musicals count? Um, well, you're able to submit librettis or other forms of plays that may have some musical aspect, but you do want to keep in mind that you're only submitting a manuscript here. We don't accept any visual or audio portion for this application form. Um, so that's one thing to keep in mind. You may even want to consider um, applying for this and music sound depending on what you want to showcase and what portion of the work you are representative of, like if you are a composer versus if you're a playwright in this case. But if you do have more details, definitely feel free to shoot us an email and I'd be happy to answer your question further. Is it a short film script maxing out at 20 pages or the first 20 pages of a feature? Um, if I'm understanding your question correctly, it sounds like you're curious on whether and what type of work you could submit within those 20 pages. Um, you're welcome to submit work that is holistically represented in those 20 pages, which, if that's the case, then that's your entire body of work. And that may be possible for a short film versus a feature. However, if your work is from a much substantial piece of work, which may be from a feature, it could be the first 20 pages of a feature. It doesn't have to be the first 20. If there's another portion that you would rather share that you feel is stronger, but you definitely want to consider that the panel has access to these 20 pages and what you want them to get out of that and what impact you want to give when sharing those work samples. So it can be a piece that's reflected in its whole or a piece from something much larger. I hope that answers your question. Just to confirm, you don't submit a full piece, for example, a full screenplay, just 21 pages. Um, in short, if I imagine for a lot of people, your screenplays may surpass 20 pages. So in this case, you would only be able to submit 20 pages plus that additional title page, which makes 21 pages total in your application. And if you have a manuscript that its entire work is represented in 20 pages, you can submit that. Um, with respect to work samples, is it better to submit two substantial pieces with varying styles to show versatility, or 20 pages from your our strongest work? Um, Definitely an interesting question. I will say in general, every panel is different. We have a different panel every year and all varying in opinions. In general, we say that if you do have work from a larger piece that you want to submit a substantial portion of that versus much smaller fragments, that is a general recommendation we have. But you do want to consider how you want to showcase your work. And I also recommend looking back at the evaluation criteria and considering, after looking at that criteria, how you want which work samples you want within your application. Um, so it's not a hard answer, but definitely something to look back into after this info session, and consider what you'd want to represent. Okay. All righty. Let's see. Hi, I'm a theater maker, meaning I create mostly nonverbal shows entirely, writing, staging, lighting, and so on. Is it possible to include pictures and videos? Thank you. Um, you wouldn't be able to submit any videos. In terms of pictures, primarily this is a literary category. Um, However, I do want to keep in mind if you decide to submit a photo in your manuscript, that does take away from the 20 pages that you would be able to submit of your manuscript. And the panel is going to be reviewing, knowing that the work sample that you are submitting is focused on the manuscript of your work. So something to keep in mind. I may have missed this, but are the written statements required to be on all be on separate documents? The written statements are all going to be on corresponding text boxes that live in the application form. So the only uploading you will need to do for your application will be for your manuscript. Everything else is written in the form. So there is a section for your artist statement, your cultural statement if you plan to submit one, as well as a section for the synopsis and character sheet. Um, and they all live there and they have their max word counts listed there. So you don't have to submit those as separate documents. But we do recommend if you want it typed out somewhere else and then copy and paste it later on, you can do that. For scripts, can we keep our WGA registration numbers on the title page, or do you just want the title of the date and script? Um, in this case, just the title of the date and the script. The title of your work and the date of that completion of the script. But if you have any further questions about that, definitely feel free to shoot us an email. Hello, would like to know if there is any point in the application process that the entire script would be required to be submitted. No, so there isn't a portion of the application review process where we ask to submit your full script. So the 20 pages that you submit is what will be reviewed throughout the entire panel review process. If we don't submit the first 20 pages of our screenplay, how much information should we provide to give context to the 20 pages? And do we do this on the title page? If your work, it sounds like it's coming from a much larger body of work. So you have the opportunity to share further context in the synopsis. And it is a required section. That section lives on the application form and is there's no uploading, so you would actually be typing it or copying and pasting it into the application form. So I'd recommend using that section to give the as much context as you need, noting it is up to 250 words max, but the context that you would need so that the panel has an understanding of your work if you decide to give a manuscript that starts after the first 20 pages, or even if it starts later, just so that they have a holistic idea of your work. Can we apply as a collaboration in one category and an individual in another? No. If you're applying as a collaboration, you can apply in up to two categories as a collaboration. Similarly, if you're applying as an individual and only as an individual, you can apply in two categories, different categories as an individual, but you can't apply in one category as a collaboration and one as an individual. How would you recommend pulling from a manuscript that is over 20 pages? Um, if by pulling it, you mean choosing which section, um, since the work that people want to show definitely varies for everyone, and this is one of the more subjective parts of what to submit in your work, you definitely want to consider that you know that the panel will only have access to those 20 pages. So definitely choose something that you feel will be digestible to the panel and will leave an impact and also coincides with the other relevant information that you've provided in your application. Of course, if you have any further questions about that, feel free to shoot us an email. This is definitely one of the harder parts of submitting your application is choosing what to pull from a manuscript that exceeds what we accept in our applications. But definitely keep that in mind when considering what portion you'd like to submit. And if you're talking about a different type of pulling in relation to this, please feel free to send us a question. Should the character sheet be included in the 20-page sample, or should we definitely fit it into the 250 word box? The only place your character sheet should live is in that 250 word box. So it should not be in your manuscript, in the text box. Would you recommend for those of us that don't have a published manuscript yet, but are hoping to use the funding to create our first work for the sample submission? I'm sorry, I let me read this. We read this again. Oh, what would you recommend for those of us that don't have a published manuscript yet, but are hoping to use the funding to create our first work? So in this case, because you don't have to have a submitted, um, your work doesn't have to have been previously published. We know we have artists and writers who are applying from all different levels of their artistic development. So in this case, you would be submitting a piece of work that may be completed for you, and just hasn't been published or hasn't been produced. So I would recommend choosing that strongest piece that you want to showcase to the panel, um, and sharing that vision with them. Since this, as I mentioned earlier, the Niska Knife for Artists Fellowship is an unrestricted cash award. So it's not contingent on you completing a project. It's not a project grant. So it's more so focused on ensuring that we can push your artistic vision and practice forward. So I'd recommend submitting that completed piece that you have that hasn't been published, but ensuring it's not a super rough draft so that the panel can at least comprehend that section. And it can be part of a continuing piece. We know, especially for writers, writing a full screenplay is very different from completing a painting, for example. So if that 20 pages is completed in its part, you can submit that. Can the work sample be in Act 3 instead of starting from Act 1 as long as you provide context? In short, yes, it doesn't have to, the manuscript you provide doesn't have to start from the beginning. The site says residents outside of New York City are prioritized. Can you say more about this? Is there a specific percentage of folks you are prioritizing outside of the city versus in the city? Overall, we do have a priority that we want to ensure geographic diversity for the applicants that we have applying. There isn't a specific, there isn't, for example, a quota or something that is restricting a certain percentage. However, we are making sure that there are efforts for all regions of New York State to be represented, which is another reason why we are presenting the panelist nomination form. We do want to have artists from outside of New York City as well as within New York City so that we can have a holistic group of artists to peer review applications. And throughout the review process, we do emphasize that we have artists who are applying from all across New York State that we want to be represented throughout this process. So there isn't a specific percentage per se, but we are making efforts to ensure that we have as much geographic representation as possible. Should any of the materials delineate how we use the grant money, or are there materials just to give the panel a picture of who we are as artists? Um, you you don't need to delineate how you plan to use any of the grant money. There isn't a budget that is requested on this application form. Similarly, we don't have a statement that asks how you plan to use the funding, because this isn't a project grant, and this is the one unique natures of it being an unrestricted grant. You're welcome to use the funding however you wish. Similarly, if someone is awarded a Niska Knife for Artists Fellowship, we don't ask for a mid project report or a final report to ensure that you're using the funds in a certain way. Um, so it's more so to just paint a picture of who you are as an artist. So if there's anything in relation to your work, or if there are any materials that you use, especially for any work that involves being on the stage that you want to share, this is an opportunity for you to share that so the panel has an idea of who you are as an artist and less so for how you would use the funds. Can I submit a project that has been submitted to another organization and was awarded or will be awarded? Yes, you can, so long as you haven't been awarded with this work for the Niska Knife for Artists Fellowship. So for this award specifically, As long as that's not the case, you're welcome to use work that you have been awarded for in the past for this application. Is the fellowship given to early career playwrights based on the strength of the work sample? I'm unclear if when production a production resume is required. No resume is required. We do not ask for a resume or CV for this award. In terms of the level of their careers, we've had artists from all different levels of their careers be awarded, as well as just applying in general. So it's open to anyone in all different levels of their career. This is one reason why we don't have a resume included because we do want all artists to be reviewed as evergreen as possible. And we want more consideration into the artistic vision and voice versus where they are in their career. So in short, we don't request a resume. And those who have been awarded in the past have definitely varied in terms of their artistic career. And if you're curious about who has been awarded in the past, there is a fellowships directory that lives within the NYSCA and Knife for Artists Fellowship pages. So you're welcome to look at that and see who's previously been awarded. What do you mean by the circumstances in which the viewer audience should experience the work? Is it as in if it's a play, do you want more specifics beyond that, saying a theater space? That is one example. If that's relevant to your work, you're welcome to share that because we know some people are applying, maybe submitting works from stage plays. This is definitely an opportunity if there's something unique about that, or if there's something that you really want the panel to know that they may not have captured otherwise just by reading your manuscript. This is an opportunity to share that information. Of course, if you feel that your manuscript is speaking for itself when it comes to that piece, you don't have to add that into your artist statement, but it's definitely something you want to consider if you feel that that is very important information for the panel to know. Hope that answers your question. As an individual who writes books, music, and lyrics for a musical, I'm concerned that splitting my work into multiple categories would lower my chance. I'm also wondering how musical numbers would be reviewed by the playwriting panel, presumably without music, and the music panel, presumably without words. Thank you. So, in general, if you plan to apply in two different categories, they will be reviewed by separate panels. Every category has its own panel, so they're not being reviewed together. Of course, you can only be awarded in one category overall, but you would be submitting two separate applications and they'd be looked at independently. That being said, for example, if you're applying in music sound, there is an opportunity for you to provide a lyric sheet. If you're interested in knowing more about music sound, definitely join the music sound info session or review the guidelines. But for playwriting and screenwriting in particular, we do try and make sure that we have a panel that is representative of different parts of the space within playwriting and screenwriting. And I do want to emphasize because it is focused around manuscripts, you do want to keep in mind what you would like to submit in this category since there is no visual component. And if there's more that you want to do a deeper dive on in relation to your work samples, and get more into the specifics on that, I would definitely recommend shooting an email to us at Fellowships. Can the sample be from the middle of the screenplay or should it be the first 20 pages of the script? It doesn't have to be the first 20 pages if you feel that there's another section that is stronger. So there's no requirement on where that section is. Just keeping in mind that the panel will only have those 20 pages and you want to choose a section that is digestible to the panel. Can you elaborate on the cultural statement? The cultural statement, which is an optional statement, and it is available to anyone who may have work that they feel is related to their cultural practice, tradition, or community. If you feel that that is very integral to your work and that is represented in your manuscript in some way, this is an opportunity for you to dive deeper into that. It's more so in how that relates to you personally on a cultural level. So if you find that your work is not related to you in that way, there's no necessity to submit that statement. The panel is also going to be aware that this is an optional statement and only can be expected from those who have work that they feel is closely tied to them in terms of cultural practice or any traditions or anything related to a community that they are integrated in. If I'm applying for two categories, can the artist statement be the same? Um, it can be if you find that it's relevant for both categories. If you may find you may need to tweak it depending on the discipline that you're applying in. So the short answer is yes, because they will be reviewed as two separate applications by two different panels, but just keeping in mind that you want to ensure that it just aligns with the discipline that you're applying for. Okay. We have a little under 10 minutes left, so I'll try to get through as many questions as I can. Wondering roughly how many plays and how many screenplays do you expect to receive, or more plays and screenplays genuinely submitted? Um, I don't have a number that I could give right now since it does vary from year to year. This category is offered every 3 years, and it varies so much in what type of work we're receiving overall. Um, in terms of so in terms of what that ratio is, I don't have an answer that I can give, but I can say that we usually get a wide range of both within each of their respective spaces. You mentioned a PDF for submitting a work sample. So for theater, will we show just the photos of an on stage of the stage or the script or both? Because this category is primarily a literary category, you would be submitting work as a playwright. Um, so the manuscript is what the panel would be reviewing if you're submitting a PDF for this category. Is the grant considered taxable income? Thanks. If someone is awarded for the Niska Knife for Artist Fellowship, you are, and this is something that is also mentioned on the eligibility form before you continue applying. You will have to submit a W-9 if awarded, and at the beginning of the following tax year, you can expect to receive a 1099 from NYFA. Legally, I cannot give any tax advice, but I would recommend it if one is awarded and they have a 1099 to go to a tax accountant and figure out the best way to file this form. But you will receive a 1099. And there is a link on the eligibility form with more information of how that works from the IRS. If I use the 20 pages for three 5-page shorts, would I need to use separate title pages? No, you don't have to use separate title pages. I could recommend putting the titles of all of these on that main title page and listing the page numbers and having some corresponding page numbers to make that clear for the panel to understand. It doesn't have to, the goal of the title page is just to make it clear what work samples you have in your application and where they live in that manuscript. If I can't find what year I received a NIFA fellowship for in the past, it was definitely over 5 years ago. Can I contact someone to get the accurate info? Um, yes, you can contact us if you received a fellowship in the past. So you can go to email us at fellowships@nifa.org and I can look into if you were an awardee. If in general, if you're just looking for like an overall list, you can go to the fellowships directory. If you're just curious right now, we do have a list of all of our past fellows from 1985 up until now. So you're welcome to look at that list. But if you are really unsure and you know you've been awarded for the Niska for Artist Fellowship in the past, please shoot us an email. Should the character descriptions only be for the ones in the sample, or should we describe the other characters as well? Um, Great question. I'd say since there is a limited amount of space, definitely talk about the characters that you know the panel will actually be um, learning about through your manuscript. However, if there are certain characters that are shared um, passively or certain characters that you feel need to be shared so that that portion of your manuscript is understood, you're welcome to share them as well. So anything that you feel would be significant to the panel so that they have a better understanding of your manuscript, you can definitely share that in the character sheet. I'm just going to get through a few more questions before we wrap up since we have about a minute left. And I do want to reiterate again for anyone who may have come in very late, this is being recorded and will be available on the fellowship's homepage about a week from now. Um, so you're welcome to look at this again at a future date. So I just want to mention that for anyone who's still on. Um, and can it be a work in progress? It's for our literary categories in general, we know it's pretty unique in how a full body of work gets completed. So your work can be either completed in part, so the part that you submit is completed, doesn't have to be published per se. Um, so it can be part of an ongoing body of work or part of a work that has been published. Is it the same panel that reviews screenplays and stage plays? Yes, there are a variety of playwrights and screenwriters within the panel for playwriting, screenwriting. And the panelists will represent both playwrights and screenwriters since we know we receive a large pool from both of them. We want to ensure that both types of work can be properly reviewed. Okay, a lot of questions. I'm sure there are more, and it's 3 o'clock, so we're going to end it here. If anyone does have any further questions, or if I didn't get to your question, or you have a question later on, doesn't have to be today, it could be next week or in the next couple of weeks, please feel free to shoot us an email at fellowships@nifa.org, and we'll get to answering your questions as soon as we can. Of course, everything that I've mentioned regarding this playwriting, screenwriting category is available on the NIFA website on the fellowship's homepage. You'll be able to find the application guidelines, the apply portal button. You'll see an apply button, as well as a section for frequently asked questions, some further application tips, and etc. So if you need any of that information right away, you're welcome to go to the website and find that. But for today, I want to say thank you for attending. And I wish you all the best of luck on submitting your applications. And that deadline is December 17th. So don't forget, 5 p.m. Don't wait until that date to submit. And thank you once again. Bye.